Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ilyas from the Department of Education, Hazara University, Mansehra. Today's topic is conducting effective research interviews. What is the process that is involved in conducting effective research interviews? This is the topic that we will discuss in this particular presentation. So let us begin with a brief introduction to what is a research interview. Well, an interview in the research context is an important and frequently used data collection tool in social sciences research, especially studies that adopt qualitative research designs. So there might be a use of it in some other types of research designs, such as mixed method research designs, but primarily research interviews are research tools that are used in qualitative research designs. And this is actually very useful as a data collection process, as a data collection technique. But it is also important to conduct the interviews in an effective way. In many cases, it can happen that the interviews that are not conducted in an effective way might lead to the accumulation or collection of data that is not very useful for the research process. So what can we do? What can the researchers do, especially the junior researchers and the student researchers often find it difficult to conduct research interview in an effective way. So this particular presentation is to identify some of the ways, some of the steps that could be taken to conduct research interviews in an effective way. So I have actually identified 3 stages of the research interviews. So the steps that need to be taken, or the measures that need to be taken before the conduct of the interview, and so before interview, and then during interview, what needs to be done to make it effective, and then there are some certain things that needs to be done after the interview. So before interview, the first thing that needs to be done to prepare to make the interview process more effective is to actually prepare the interview schedule in a well thought out way. So in many cases, researchers, especially junior researchers, rush to conduct interviews without properly planning for it and without preparing interview schedules that is in a systematic way and in a well thought out way, and that can lead to an ineffective interview. So the first thing needs to be done is to prepare the interview schedule, or the questions that are to be asked during the interview process, in a well thought out way. So what should be done is that one should make sure that the interview schedule is reflective of the research objectives. So one of the ways in which you can look at your interview schedule to make it more effective is to look at your interview schedule and the questions that are part of the interview schedule in the light of the research objectives. The second is that make sure that the language, which includes vocabulary and structure of the language of the interview schedule, or the questions that are asked in the interview schedule, the language that is used in the schedule should be accessible and should be clear. And so there should not be any ambiguity related to the questions that are asked, or related to the structure or the language or the vocabulary or the grammar that is actually used in the development of the research, of the questions, of the interview questions. The next thing that needs to be done before the conduct of the interview is to share the schedule with seniors, and if you are a research student, with your research supervisors for peer review. It is always a useful thing although you are the main actor, the main person who understands the what, why, and how of the research of the interview questions. But at the same time, peer review is an important aspect of preparing an effective interview schedule. And so it is important that the research supervisor is consulted when the research interview, the schedule, and the interview questions are being prepared. The next thing that needs to be done at this stage, that is before the before interview stage, is to conduct a pilot study before going for the main data collection process. In many cases, if you are an experienced researcher, you can go and collect data directly without the need for the pilot study in order to know the possible weaknesses in the structure or the content of the questions. But as a junior researcher or as a student researcher, it is quite important that a pilot study is conducted. This process will help in refining the interview questions, and it will help in refining the way the questions are asked and in refining the process of the formal conducting of the interview. So piloting before the interview before the main interview process is quite important and is very helpful in refining and making the interview process more useful and more effective. The next thing is plan with respondents regarding their consent, availability, location, time, and place of interview. A well-organized interview is something that will happen with proper planning. So this planning actually includes taking the consent of the people that one wants to interview, or the interviewees or the respondents, and similarly their availability at a particular place or a particular time. So the time and place of the interview schedule of the interview process should be properly planned and decided before one goes into the formal process of data collection through the interview. The next thing is getting access to interviewing recording equipment and understanding how to use it. This is also very important. In many cases, interviewers just take a recorder, and most research interviews are actually recorded with the permission of the participants or the interviewees. And so it is quite important to understand how to actually you are going to record the interview, and also to make sure that you understand how to use the equipment or the interview recorder or the sound recorder or whatever form of recording it is, the equipment, the mechanism of the equipment, and how to use it properly is something understanding of which is very important for effective interviewing process. This is quite important because it is always an unpleasant thing if it happens that one goes to into the interview and then comes to know that they don't know how to use the recorder, properly use the interview recorder or other equipment that might be used during the interview process. The next important step in the before interview steps is, if you are recording the interview, make sure that the recording instrument is working properly. So even if you already know how to use it, sometimes it happens that you are recording and you don't know whether the recorder is actually recording. So this could happen that the whole interview process will come to an end, and then you will come to know that nothing has been recorded. Or the recording is not very good, or something that you cannot actually properly hear later on. So the quality of the recording and to check that you are actually recording and recording properly, a recording that you can comprehend later on, is something That is very important. And so this should also be made sure in the beginning that the recording instrument is working properly. Then we move to the second stage for conducting the effective interview, and that is the stage that I call during the interview. So what needs to be done during the interview process in order to make the interview process more effective? The first one is take care of time, and in other words, be punctual, which actually means that the time that you have decided with the interviewee, you need to stick to that particular time. You need to show discipline in terms of your arrival at the particular site of the interview, and in terms of making sure that you start the interview on time and you move on and you end the interview on proper time. And so this is something that is quite useful. The second thing is be courteous and welcoming. Exchange pleasantries in the beginning and throughout the interview process, and especially towards the end as well. Courtesy and a welcoming attitude is something that is very important in order to make the interviewee at ease, so that he or she can share with you in a more pleasant and freer way the information, whatever information you need. The next thing is at this stage, when you are actually beginning the proper interviewing process and the recording process as well, ask for permission to begin the formal interview process. And then, so that the interviewee is actually mentally ready that you are now beginning the formal interview process. Introduce yourself and your research project and ask for an introduction of the participants. So in the very beginning, in the very beginning of the formal interview process, it is a good thing and it is a useful thing to introduce yourself formally and to introduce your research project and some of the main aims of your research project. And also, you might ask the interviewee for a formal introduction of him or herself. And then ask more general or broader questions in the beginning before getting into more specific questions regarding the research study. This is something important, because asking a more general question or a broader questions will actually help in the smooth beginning of the interview process. And at this stage, the interviewee might not need to think on a much higher, deeper analytical level. And so they need a beginning. And this general or broader question will actually help the interviewee into getting into a situation and getting into a frame of mind which can later on prepare them for the more specific and detailed questions later on. Then the during interview stage also includes moving on to more specific questions after you have asked the more general questions, and so the interview process has begun in a smooth way. And use at this stage, you can use probes and prompts where needed. In many cases, the interviewee gives answers where some more detail is needed, and so the interviewer will ask for probes in order to get deeper and to dig deeper into the insights and into the perceptions of the interviewees. Similarly, prompts, in some cases, interviewees find it difficult to begin answering some questions. And prompts are a very useful way of actually initiating and assisting the interviewees in coming up with answers, with answers that require a more, perhaps more critical thinking. But remember that probes and prompts should be used where they are very needed. They are essentially needed. In some cases, prompts might impact the viewpoint or the way the interviewee wants to answer, and so that is something that should be taken care of. Deal intelligently with divergences. This can happen. In some cases, the interviewees can diverge from while they are answering, and so they can diverge and they can go into details that are actually not required, and they are also costing time that is arranged between the interviewee and the interviewer, and so it is a useful thing for the interviewer to actually deal with divergences in an intelligent way and to bring the interviewee back to the point or to the question that is being asked. But this should be done intelligently and tactfully so that the possible interruption is not kind of taken as something like a rude behavior. And so intelligent dealing with divergences is an important aspect of an effective interview. Then be attentive to what the respondent is sharing and let them feel you are keenly listening. In many cases, the respondents or the interviewees feel offended if they are answering while the interviewer is looking somewhere else, or he seems lost in some other thoughts, or he is busy with his equipment or with his interview schedule. So it is quite important that the interviewer must have this in mind, that he needs to at least look very attentive while the interviewee or the respondent is answering his questions or her questions. Then this is also very important, that the interviewer must be very careful regarding time. And this is something, the time issue shall always be on the mind of the interviewer. And one of the things that are associated with this care about time is to keep the most important questions in the middle of the interview, so that even if you run out of time, the most essential information needed for your study has already been obtained. So sometimes it can happen. You have arranged, for example, 30 minutes or 1 hour with a respondent. And then, because of the details that the respondents gave in response to certain questions, time might pass beyond that limit, and some of the important questions might be left unanswered. So, an effective interviewer will know that the most important questions are asked, and so it is quite important that the most important questions are put in the middle of the interview, and so even if some of the questions that are not significantly important, even if they are left because of the shortage of time, that doesn't become a big issue. Then the next one is give the respondent an opportunity to say what you might have missed in the schedule by asking questions such as, would you like to say anything else or more related to this issue? In many cases, it happens that the interviewer might have missed certain questions or certain aspects of the issue that they are actually exploring. But the interviewee or the respondents might know something more important that should come into light regarding that particular issue that is being explored. And so such questions, such open questions generally towards the end of the interview are important, where you give an open chance or opportunity to the interviewer or to the respondent to fill in that particular gap. And so that kind of information might be very important for further actually elaborating on or explaining or understanding the particular issue under discussion. Then one thing more that needs to be taken care of is, beside recording, you might want to make notes of important information during the interview process. As I said earlier, there might be some issues with recording all sorts of things, and even if the problem happens while you are recording, if you are also taking notes at the same time, this will be something that will be very useful, and it will be an additional kind of measure against possible loss of information or data. But remember that while you are taking notes or while you are actually writing certain things during the process of interview, it should not be a divergence from your main focus, and that is paying attention to the interviewee and asking questions and actually engaging in conversation. Then at this stage, at the end of the interview, one very important thing, which is a part of the courtesy involved in the process of interview, is to say thank you at the end of the interview. Now we move to the last part, and that is after the interview. So what needs to be done after the interview? The first thing is check that you have recorded the information properly. This is quite important. And if you feel that there is something missing, and if you have still got some time, you can actually do something about it and ask that in an informal way. The second thing is try to make copies of information recorded immediately after the interview. When you get back to your place, making copies is important, because in many cases it can happen that you might lose the recording or the transcript because of some accident or something. So making copies and putting those copies in more than one safe places is quite important. Then transcribe and translate the interview, which is a normal process for the onwards analysis and record keeping of the interview process. Make summaries, memos, and reflective notes, because these are the things that are fresh in your mind. And so doing these immediately after the interview is very important. And then you may send transcriptions to the respondents for validation and authentication. This is important because in many cases you might have misinterpreted some information because of issues in understanding language or pronunciation, or because of problem in recording. And so for validation of the interview transcripts, it is quite important that these transcripts are sent back to the respondents for validation and authentication. And the last thing is keep the information safe to avoid losing it or have issues related to anonymity and confidentiality. Remember that two of the most important considerations in research data are actually keeping the data safe and not losing it, because it's not easy to get access to and to get consents and to get back to the formal process of data collection. And secondly, anonymity and confidentiality, which are actually ethical considerations related to the aspects of ethical considerations in research. That is also very important. So you need to keep the information safe, and you need to keep the information in a way which remains anonymous, so that the identity of the respondents is not known. This is especially the case where sensitive information has been obtained. So this is the general process of conducting an effective interview, and I hope that the steps that I have identified with the 3 different stages of the conduct of the interview, that is, steps before the formal conduct of the interview, steps during the formal conduct of the interview, and steps after the interview. These steps, if you understand these and if you follow these steps, the interview process will be very effective and very useful. Thank you for your time and for your attention. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask those questions, or if you need clarifications regarding certain aspects of this presentation, feel free to share your views and comments in the comment section. Thank you very much for your time. Take care. Bye.